We're going to spend some time talking about eyewitnesses in the legal system. The reason for this is because this is a very important topic, but also it has a little bit to do with the field of psych and law itself. The discipline of psychology and law started in the late 70s, early 80s. And although that may seem like a long time to you, I mean, you're talking about a discipline that's less than 50 years old. And so as a discipline, even though it's done some amazing things in a very short period of time, it's still considered fairly new in psychology. Well, when the discipline started, one of the things that the researchers focused on first was the issue of eyewitnesses. And so in our discipline, we have had the opportunity to really devote many, many years to looking at some of the strengths and weaknesses of eyewitness testimony and eyewitness memory. And so that's why we know so much about this, is because it was the focus early on in psych and law. Since then, we've moved into many, many different directions, but this is the one that has probably the most data. Now, before we begin to talk about what we know about eyewitnesses, let's look at an actual case in which eyewitness testimony was the crucial piece, and to show you just how important eyewitness testimony is and what impact it can have on the legal system.
Tonight, a second look at a Texas case raising questions about the death penalty. In the 30 years since the Supreme Court reinstated capital punishment, no state has executed more people than Texas, 367. Now a joint investigation between ABC News and the Chicago Tribune finds that Texas may have put at least one innocent man to death. Corpus Christi, Texas gas station attendant Wanda Lopez knows she is in trouble. Within 90 seconds, blood-curdling screams as she's stabbed to death. Justice came quickly, too. Within an hour, police arrest this man, Carlos De Luna, a local petty thief who liked to sniff glue. The evidence against him, an eyewitness, and little else. And even though there are no fingerprints, no blood on him from the vicious stabbing, De Luna becomes the lone suspect. Till the day he is executed for the crime, he denies he committed the murder. His story, he was nearby and saw the commotion, and because he was on parole, ran from police. At least one Corpus Christi detective believes him.
It bothers me. It bothers me right now that a wrong man got put to death.
Eddie Garza says he told the detective leading the investigation another more violent criminal named Carlos Hernandez was bragging about the crime. That lead investigator told the Tribune Garza never told her that, and she followed up every lead. Your informants are telling you on the street you got the wrong guy.
That's the information that I was getting on the street. He told other people, yeah, Carlos De Luna took a fall for me. Nobody listened.
Hernandez had a long record of 25 arrests and a reputation as a man who loved his knife. Former girlfriend Margie Tapia.
It slept under the pillow where he slept. He cleaned it off in front of me. He would talk to it just like if it was a person.
Hernandez was later convicted of stabbing this woman with the same kind of knife used on Wanda Lopez. Perhaps most disturbing about what happened here in Corpus Christi is that Carlos Hernandez and his weapon of choice were no secret. In fact, 2 homicide detectives and 1 prosecutor knew about him. But at trial, when Carlos De Luna told the jury it was Carlos Hernandez who did the stabbing, the lead prosecutor scoffed and called Hernandez a phantom in front of the jury.
It's very troubling that one prosecutor says Carlos Hernandez is a phantom when the other prosecutor sitting right next to him knows very well exactly who Carlos Hernandez is and his violent tendencies.
Chicago Tribune reporter Steve Mills and his partner Maurice Posley investigated the De Luna murder along with Nightline. Neither prosecutor would appear on camera, but the Tribune interviewed twice the DA who knew Hernandez.
The first time, he says, sure, I knew Carlos Hernandez was a dangerous guy. Why didn't I tell Steve Schuetz, the co-prosecutor? I don't know. Then in a subsequent interview, he says, yeah, I'm sure I told him.
The lead prosecutor denies that.
The man who calls him a phantom to the jury says he never told me that. I would have liked to have known that.
But both prosecutors say the eyewitness identifications were strong enough for the jury to convict. And And the last man to talk to Carlos de Luna, Reverend Carol Pickett, death row chaplain, watched 32 men die before him. He says de Luna made a lasting impression.
It changed my perspective on the act of death itself and capital punishment, because this was the first one that I was almost sure in my heart and soul and spirit that I felt was totally innocent.
The NAACP Legal Defense Fund helped in the investigation. The Chicago Tribune series begins in tomorrow's paper. We'll be right back.
As you can see, faulty eyewitness testimony has some real consequences in the legal system. So before we take a look at eyewitnesses, let's do a little task here. Let's see how good a witness you are. Okay, so we go to this website, and you're going to observe an event. And I want you to watch very carefully, because you're going to be asked to look at a lineup and identify the bomber from a lineup. Okay, there's a short clip. Now, the question is, can you identify the bomber on the roof from the lineup?
This is a good one.
Can you identify the bomber? I obviously can't tell what numbers you're picking here, but I will say that if you picked 1, you just identified an innocent person. And actually, the bomber on the roof is not in the lineup. This is Gary Wells, who's done a lot of his website. He's done a lot of research on eyewitnesses. And as he says, call it a trick if you want, but it remains the case that many jurisdictions across the country do not warn witnesses that the perpetrator might not be in the lineup. And thereby, there's sort of implicit pressure to pick somebody from the lineup. So how good were you? I have to tell you that I'm really bad as an eyewitness. I hardly ever get any of these right. So if you didn't get it right, don't worry. You'll have other opportunities, by the way. So why research this topic, eyewitness testimony, eyewitness memory? First of all, police are much more likely to pursue a case if they have an eyewitness. Only problem is they're likely not to pursue it any further if they do have an eyewitness who's made an identification. So if they have an eyewitness, they'll probably look for a suspect, but if the eyewitness picks the suspect out of the lineup, they're likely not to ask any more questions. And certainly that was true in the de Luna case. Even when they had evidence that they got the wrong man, they weren't even interested. Sometimes in cases, you'll have a lot of physical evidence that doesn't agree with an eyewitness, and a lot of times the police will disregard the lack of physical evidence or the physical evidence that contradicts it. In the de Luna case, if you remember, he was caught and he had absolutely no blood on him. Now, he had just supposedly stabbed a woman in a convenience store. They got him less than an hour later, and yet he had no blood on him. But they didn't seem to question that particular piece. So eyewitnesses can be very powerful in the investigation itself. Also, juries can be very persuaded by an eyewitness. It's very difficult to distinguish an accurate from an inaccurate witness, and juries tend to believe eyewitnesses. And as you saw in the DeLuna case, errors are costly. It costs DeLuna his life. And in fact, the Innocence Project, which looks to help exonerate people who were convicted when they were innocent, the Innocence Project has exonerated more than 300 individuals since they started in the early 80s. And 62% of the convictions, the false convictions, were due to faulty eyewitness testimony. Mistaken eyewitness identification was the primary cause of some of these mistaken convictions. So the errors are costly in terms of people's lives. The average, in the Innocence Project, the average innocent person, by the time they were found innocent, had already spent 8.5 years in jail. So it cost them their lives in terms of time, and it costs our system quite a bit of money for all of these errors. So this topic is a very important topic. Let's take a look a little bit at what we know about eyewitness memory. Many people believe that they never forget a face, and you may have heard somebody say something like that. And several studies have shown that face recognition rates are really pretty good. So for example, if you have, you give people a series of faces, let's say 10, 20, 30 faces that you see on a screen for a short period of time, and then at some later time you give them faces, some of which they've seen before and some of which they haven't seen before. People are pretty good at saying, yep, I've seen that one. Nope, I haven't seen that one, and so forth. The problem is, just because we can recognize a face, does that mean that we can conclude that eyewitness recognition has the same degree of accuracy? The problem is that good face recognition is a necessary but not sufficient condition for good eyewitness memory. What do I mean by that? You need to be able to recognize faces in order to be a good witness. However, just being able to recognize faces is not enough to lead to good identification. So let's take a look at some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with here. Gary Wells, whose website we were just at, published a paper in which he separated witness factors into two different types. One is witness factors, which are sometimes called estimator variables. Okay? Estimator variables. These are factors that are inherent in the witnessing situation. These are factors that were present when that person witnessed the crime. So was it dark? Was the person far away? Was there a weapon involved? Things like that. These are things that we know can cause errors, and we can try to estimate the accuracy from how many estimator variables there are in a case. So we can't really change what happened when a witness was watching a crime, but we can sort of try to estimate whether or not there may be some inaccuracy based on all these different factors. I mean, just simply knowing that it was extremely dark when a crime occurred, that's an estimator variable. And in court, you might want to bring up the fact that it was very dark and it was very difficult for a witness to see. The second group of factors are really kind of more important in some ways. These are system variables. These are factors that can be controlled by the criminal justice system to improve accuracy. In other words, these are variables that are part of the criminal justice system, part of the way in which we deal with eyewitness identification and testimony that we can change. So we're going to be looking at both system variables and witness variables, estimator variables, in the next few lectures. But we're going to start with system variables. And let me start by giving you a list of these system variables. And don't worry about it, understanding all of the pieces, because we will be going through each one. One system variable is lineup fairness, the degree to which the lineup itself is a fair and good lineup. Verbal overshadowing. This is something we're going to talk about a little bit, but basically when people describe a face, does it then make it more difficult for them to identify a face in a lineup? Composite creation. This is a little bit like verbal overshadowing. Often we ask witnesses to help to create composites, a composite sketch, so we can publish it in the newspaper and try to have somebody call in and identify the suspect. Does this composite creation, how good is it, and does it lead to more errors? Next one is lineup presentation mode. You know, we have a suspect, and we often ask eyewitnesses to pick the suspect out of a lineup. Is the way that we're doing lineups a problem? And we're going to be talking about that. Pre-lineup instruction. We just did the bomber case. The type of instruction that we give people when they're going to do a lineup. For example, most jurisdictions now and should say the perpetrator may not be in the lineup because we caught somebody, but maybe we caught the wrong person. So we need to caution people about a target absent, what we call a target absent lineup. And then finally, post-identification feedback. The person makes a choice, what kinds of things we say to them after they make the choice, and whether that can affect their eyewitness memory. So those are the system variables that we're going to be covering. In this lecture, we're only going to cover one of these system variables, and that's lineup fairness. So consider a bias lineup. I'm going to show you a picture from a Texas case. This was a lineup. This was taken this is a 1995 case, and the perpetrator was described as a black male, okay? And so what they did was they gave the witness a photograph and asked them to pick out, see if the perpetrator was there. And here is the lineup. What's wrong with this lineup? I think you can see what's wrong with this lineup. What they have done is they've picked 1, 2, possibly 3, 4 Hispanic males, and they only have 1 African American or black male in the lineup. This is a very biased lineup. As you can see, this right here suggests that this particular lineup was shown at trial, and probably the attorney was making the point that this is a biased lineup. Let me give you an example of an unbiased lineup. Here's another case. This also was a Texas, oh no, this was a West Virginia case. So here's the problem. A detective had to put together a lineup. The victim, or the critical eyewitness in this particular case, described the perpetrator as a black male with crossed eyes. So he's cross-eyed. Okay? Now the detective had a photo of 1 black male with crossed eyes, but he didn't have any photos of any other black males with crossed eyes. So what he did was he used the computer and some forensic art techniques to create this lineup. As you can see, he took other suspect pictures and crossed their eyes so that every single person in the lineup had crossed eyes. Had only 1 person in the lineup had crossed eyes, that would have been an extremely biased lineup. By the way, in this particular case, the eyewitness looked at the lineup and easily identified the person who was the perpetrator. Okay? This lineup also probably wouldn't be challenged in court. So, biased lineups. What you have to do is the description that the eyewitness gives should match every single person in the lineup so that 1 person doesn't stick out. So let's look at a few of these, a biased lineup. So here you go. 2 eyewitnesses described the offender this way. Late teens, 15 to 16 years old, no more than 18 years old, African American black male, small build, about 120 to 140 pounds in weight, between 5'2" and 5'5" in height, long hair in some kind of braid, single row braids that were coming loose. Now this is an actual description of an actual case. Here was the lineup. Is this a biased or fair lineup? Obviously, who are you going to pick? You're going to pick number 1 because he's the only person in this particular lineup that has those braids, that braid. Here's another one. This is just some data showing that who picked what in the lineups. Here's another suspect. This is one Hispanic witness gave the following description. The person is thin, he's Hispanic, he's got a mustache and collar-length hair. There was the lineup. What's the problem with this lineup? Obviously, there's only one person in this picture who has collar-length hair. And of course, in the next page, it shows you how many people would actually pick that person. And you can see when people who have not even witnessed the crime are drawn toward one particular picture based on the description, you have an unfair lineup. So one of the first tasks in getting good eyewitness identification is lineup fairness. All the foils in the lineup should be similar. By the way, the foil is the people that you assemble that are not the suspect. So all the foils in the lineup should be similar. They should look about the same. No individual person should stand out in a lineup. The interviewer also should not favor any individual in the lineup. It's what we call a double-blind lineup. What this is an issue that's slightly different. So let's say you've put together a really pretty good lineup. It looks really good, but the person running the lineup is the detective who arrested the suspect. Okay, he knows who the suspect is in the lineup, and it turns out that when that happens, the person administering the lineup, they don't mean to give off cues, but they tend to give off cues as to which person they favor in the lineup. And so the person doing the lineup should not know who the suspect is. So that's what's called a double-blind lineup. So one of the first steps in ensuring that you do not create some problems for your case is to create a lineup that is fair. Okay? Next time we're going to talk about some of the other things that need to be done in order to ensure to maximize eyewitness accuracy.